They said she was no good. They said it in the pews on Sunday morning. They said it over fence posts and flour sacks and the rims of coffee cups. They said it with the particular cruelty that only comes from people who have never once questioned whether they themselves were good enough. Rose Calloway poured whiskey for men who called her worthless and smiled like it didn't land. She had been doing it since she was 19. She was 24 now, and she had long since stopped waiting for anyone in the town of Harlan Creek to see her differently. Then Elias Crane walked into the Golden Spur Saloon on a Tuesday night Bible under one arm, hat in hand, looking like a man who had argued with God about being there and lost. He was the preacher's son. She was the girl nobody believed in. And what happened next would shake the foundations of everything Harlan Creek thought it knew about grace. Harlan Creek, Texas, 1879. A town that had grown up fast around a cattle route and hadn't had time to develop much in the way of mercy. Reverend Silas Crane had built his church on the east end of town with his own hands 17 years ago, and he had built his son Elias with the same deliberate care Scripture memorized before arithmetic. Character before comfort, duty before desire. Elias had grown into a man of genuine faith, not performed faith. He taught Sunday school. He helped bury the dead. He visited the sick without being asked. He had never set foot in the Golden Spur until the night Tommy Briggs, 15 years old, the blacksmith's apprentice, went in on a dare and didn't come back out. His mother came to Elias in a panic, too frightened to go in herself. Elias went without hesitation. The saloon was loud and smoky, and nothing like any room he had ever stood in. He found Tommy at the bar, nursing a beer he hadn't touched, too scared to leave after the men around him started a card argument that looked close to becoming something worse. It was Rose who had quietly moved the boy to the end of the bar, away from the argument. It was Rose who had put a glass of water in front of him and told the men nearest him to find somewhere else to be loud. She hadn't done it loudly. She hadn't made a scene. She had simply done it the way a person does something when they can't not. Elias saw all of that before he saw anything else about her. He collected Tommy. He thanked her directly, genuinely, not the way men usually spoke to women in saloons. Rose looked at him like he had said something in a foreign language. "You're the preacher's boy," she said. "His son, yes," Elias said. "Thank you. What you did for that boy was kind." Rose said nothing. She picked up her cloth and went back to wiping down the bar. But her hands, Elias noticed, had gone very still for just a moment before they moved. He walked Tommy home through the night air, and could not stop thinking about the expression on her face when he said the word kind, like it was a thing that had not been aimed at her in a very long time. Rose Calloway had come to Harlan Creek at 19 with her younger brother Clem after their mother died outside of San Antonio. She had taken the only work available to a woman alone with no money and no connections. She had never pretended it was anything other than what it was. What the town chose not to see was that she sent half her wages every month to keep Clem in a school in Austin, that she had taught herself to read properly from a Bible someone had left behind the bar, that she had, over 5 years, quietly become the person the Golden Spur's rougher patrons actually listened to when things got dangerous. The town saw a saloon girl. The town did not look further. Elias began stopping by the saloon in the late afternoons, before it filled up, when Rose was restocking shelves and the place was almost quiet. He told himself the first time that he was checking on Tommy. The second time, he didn't bother with an excuse. They talked. About small things at first, the weather, the cattle prices, a book she had been working through. Then, about larger things. About what it meant to believe in something when the evidence around you was complicated. About whether a person could be defined by the circumstances they were born into or only by what they chose within them. Rose was sharper than anyone had given her room to be. Elias was more uncertain than his father's congregation suspected. They were, both of them, something truer in each other's company than they were anywhere else. The town noticed. Of course it did. Mrs. Donahue saw him leave the saloon on a Wednesday and told 4 people before she reached the end of the block. By Sunday, Reverend Silas Crane had heard 3 versions of the story, each more alarming than the last. The conversation between father and son was quiet and terrible in the way that only conversations between people who love each other and profoundly disagree can be. "You are undoing everything," Silas said. "Everything I have built, everything you were raised to be." "I haven't done anything wrong," Elias said. "The appearance of wrong is enough in a town like this. You know that." "Then perhaps the town needs to reconsider what wrong looks like," Elias said. And the silence that followed was the longest of his life. Rose, for her part, heard what was being said around town and did what she always did. She absorbed it quietly and pulled back. She told Elias the next afternoon that she thought it would be better if he stopped coming by. "You're going to lose things because of me," she said. She was not asking. "Your father's trust, the congregation, maybe the teaching position at the school." "I know," he said. And I've been in that church my whole life listening to sermons about seeing people the way God sees them." He looked at her steadily. "I'd like to try actually doing it." Rose looked away first. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were bright in a way she would not allow to become anything more. "You're going to make this very hard for me," she said. The crisis came on a Saturday night in October. A group of cattlemen, 3 weeks off the trail and careless with their pay, started in on Rose with the particular viciousness that whiskey and entitlement produce. They were loud about it, public about it. The saloon owner, Mr. Pitts, said nothing. They were paying customers, and Rose was not his problem to protect. Elias was walking past when he heard it through the open door. What happened next was talked about in Harlan Creek for years afterward, and the story changed slightly each time, depending on who was telling it. What everyone agreed on was this: Elias Crane walked into the Golden Spur, stood between Rose and those men, and spoke with the kind of calm that is more frightening than anger. He did not raise his voice. He did not touch anyone. He simply made it clear, in plain and certain language, that it was over. The men left. The saloon was silent. Rose stood behind the bar, with her hands flat on the wood, and her face absolutely composed, which was the only way she knew to hold herself when something had gotten through. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes," he said. "I did." She came around the bar then. She stood close enough that he could see that her composure was costing her something significant. "Elias." It was the first time she had used his name. "I have been in this town for 5 years, and not one person, not one, has ever stood in a room and said, 'This is not acceptable.' Not for me." He didn't fill the silence. He let it hold everything she wasn't quite saying. "I don't know what to do with you," she admitted. "You don't have to do anything with me," he said gently. "I'm just asking you to let someone be in your corner, that's all." The following morning, Reverend Silas Crane heard the full account of what his son had done from 4 separate sources before breakfast. He sat in his church for a long time afterward, alone, looking at the words above the altar that he had painted himself 30 years ago. "Love thy neighbor." He thought about the girl Rose Calloway, whom he had never once spoken to directly. He thought about the 5 years she had lived in his town, while he preached grace from 30 yards away and never offered her any. That afternoon, Reverend Crane walked into the Golden Spur for the first time in his life. He sat down at the bar. He asked for a glass of water. And when Rose brought it, he said, quietly, "I owe you an apology, Miss Calloway, and I believe my son is a better man than I have been. The town did not change overnight. Towns never do. But something had shifted in Harlan Creek, small and significant, the way a single stone moved can redirect water. Rose gave her notice at the Golden Spur 2 months later. She took a position teaching reading to the younger children at the school on the edge of town a position that opened because Elias had quietly recommended her to the school board with a letter that laid out, in careful and unanswerable detail, exactly what she was capable of. Her brother Clem came home from Austin for Christmas that year. He shook Elias's hand at the church door and said, "She wrote to me about you. She said you were decent. Rose doesn't say that about anyone." "She sets a high bar," Elias said. "I'm trying to clear it." On a Sunday in January, Rose Calloway sat in the third pew of Reverend Crane's church for the first time. She wore a dark green dress she had sewn herself. She sat straight, and she did not look at anyone who looked at her, except once when Elias, standing at the front helping his father arrange the hymnals, caught her eye and smiled. She smiled back. It was, by any measure, a small thing. But in Harlan Creek on that January morning, it felt like the first warm day after a very long winter. Nobody had believed in Rose Calloway. But one man had looked at her and seen exactly who she was and decided that was more than enough. Some people are written off before they ever get a chance to show the world who they really are. This was Rose's story, but it belongs to everyone who has ever needed one person to simply believe. If this story moved you, share it with someone who deserves to hear it. Subscribe to the Western Chronicle. A new story waits for you every week.